Hello, everybody. Thank you for waiting. We're just waiting for a couple more minutes for everyone else to join. Great. I think we're just waiting for one more person to join. Sorry, I'm on mute. So, sorry, everybody. Thank you so much for waiting. We're just going to make a start now, and I'll let people in as we come. And I'm going to pop this on recording as well. I hope that's okay with everybody, just because we can share this after this meeting for those who can't attend. So it's nice to meet all of you. My name is Jason, and I'm a third-year trainee clinical psychologist at the IOPPN. And today we are running the application workshop. And first of all, I just wanted to ask the presenters to introduce themselves. Is it okay if I start with Haleemah?
Hi everybody, my name is Haleemah. I'm a first year UEL trainee, so very new to the game. And yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing some tips with you guys. Should I pass it on, Jason?
Yes, please. So shall we start with Lizzie next?
Hi everyone, I'm Lizzie. I'm a third year trainee at the IOPPN and I'm joint co-chair with Jason of the Increasing Access Committee. Oh, I meant to pass it on, sorry. Go to Nathan next.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nathan. I'm a first year trainee clinical psychologist at King's College London at the IOPPN.
And finally, Yvette.
Hi everyone, I'm Yvette Arthur. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've got two roles in the NHS. I work in a psychosis service and I'm also the lead for psychology and psychotherapy development, so support aspiring clinical psychologists and heavily involved in some of the DClinPsy courses as well.
Thank you so much, everybody, for introducing yourselves. And can I just check that you can all hear us? Because I just saw a comment that the one person cannot hear any sound. Can someone just pop a comment on the chat? Okay, you can. So the person would just be experiencing technical difficulties. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So just to quickly, to give you a quick overview of what today's event will be. So just a reminder that today's application workshop was created based on the feedback that we received from aspiring psychologists, so based on a survey that we sent out. And today we'll be really focusing on reflections on writing a DClinPsy application form. And just a reminder, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to use the Q&A tab, as you can see on the webinar function, and just submit a question to us, and we'll be answering them at the end. And just a reminder that there are no specific course advice that can be shared, and these are all just based on personal reflections from trainees and also qualified clinical psychologists and the shortlisters, because there's more than one way to write an application and to reflect on your experiences. So first of all, we'll be starting with the trainees. So things to bear in mind, they'll be reflecting on their experience pre-training. How did they personally reflect meaningfully on a statement? And they will also be reflecting on tips on how you can also approach writing the statement. And then after that, we'll be handing it over to Dr. Yvette Arthur and also Dr. Fran Meaton, who'll be joining us slightly later. And they'll be thinking about and reflecting on what shortlisters might look out for from aspiring psychologists and tips to stand out. Okay. Just to respond to questions, there will be a recording that will be made available as soon as possible. So thank you. So first of all, I'll just hand it over to Nathan, and I'll be sharing some slides as well. Just give me 2 seconds. Nathan, would you be able to share your slides actually?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much.
Everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Great, thanks, Jason. Hello, everyone again. So yeah, I'm Nathan. I'm a first-year trainee clinical psychologist at King's College London at the IOPPN. Just before I start, just to echo again what Jason said about the fact that this is just my experience of applying to the doctor this year. Full transparency, this application got me 2 interviews, but again, two courses might see that this is a successful application, or the 2 not so much. So again, there's so many different ways you can approach the application. So again, this is just what I found useful and my own personal reflections. So as Jason said, I'm going to talk a bit about my pre-training experience, and then a bit about how to approach the reflection piece, and then just a bit about my experience and my own reflections on how I approach the application more broadly. So in terms of pre-training experience, in terms of education, so I have 3 university degrees, all from Galway in Ireland. So the first was a Bachelor of Arts. Because I did a Bachelor of Arts degree, I had to do a higher diploma conversion course, and I did a master's in clinical neuroscience. In terms of my clinical research experience then, my first role was actually in a mental health crisis intervention service. But my main clinical experience then was 2 years being an assistant psychologist. So I had 2 years at the application point. And 2 of these roles were actually in adult inpatient rehabilitation services. So again, they're very similar clinical experience roles. And again, in my experience, you don't necessarily need to be, in lots of different settings working with different populations. Because from my experience, I was working in a very similar demographic. And I've also had 3 voluntary research assistant roles. This was kind of done in my own kind of spare time because I wanted to continue developing my own research competencies. And I found it was a good way of trying to get some publications, which I knew would kind of round my application as well. So that's the experience I had before applying. Just switch to the next slide. So in terms of the reflective statement itself, I mean, this is just how I understood it. And again, there's different ways you can approach it. So what I found was it was just an opportunity to show how you think about your clinical and research experience. It's really not a place to actually list what you've done. There is a place at the top of the application. I'm sure if lots of you have opened the application so far, there is a place to show the kind of duties and roles that you've done in your experiences. So I found it as a place to just think about, to actually think about your clinical and research experience, and mainly like what you've pulled out of it. So for example, if 2 people have the very same AP experience or research assistant experience, what have you pulled from that, and how does that make you ready for training? Yeah, so essentially showing what experiences do you have that made you ready for training. What did you take out of it? What did you learn? Again, the way I thought of it as well is you're applying for a band 6 NHS position. What have you taken out to show that you're ready for that stage of training as well? And it's really not about kind of shoehorning in like lots of different experiences. It's really about, even if you have very limited clinical or research experience, how can you reflect on that to show that you're actually ready to step into training in terms of how you can formulate, how you can apply theory and things like that. So it's really just kind of showing how you think and how you process things and using different examples. One main thing I guess everyone will be very kind of conscious about is the word count. It's a very kind of strict character limit. And again, this is done quite intentionally because I think it allows you to be, it means you have to be quite efficient in your writing and you have to be quite clear. And it's really, you really don't want to be putting in too many examples. You want to be quite efficient in getting across what kind of impact what you want to say. So I guess my recommendation from my experience would just be to try and limit the amount of words and characters and word count that you have behind your content, your context behind your examples. So you really want to focus most of your characters on, I guess, what you learned and what you took away, because again, it is a reflection piece. So you don't want to be spending 3 or 4 lines talking about the context behind a clinical case, for example. Really try and get it quite short and snappy, and then really pull out your reflections. And that's from my experience anyway. I guess something that's maybe a bit more understated is actually the way in which you write it. So trying to write quite efficiently with clarity, and the structure you're writing is really important. People reading applications want to see that you're able to kind of communicate yourself quite well and quite clear, and you want to have a good flow. It should be quite easy to read. So for me, I know there's definitely kind of temptation to kind of shoehorn in a lot of things into one paragraph, for example, because you really want to like show the application people that you've done a lot of different things. But I guess for me, I wanted to have one take-home message per paragraph. You could have one example that kind of covers different points, but we really don't want to kind of make it quite messy or hard to follow. You want to be able to read a paragraph and show, okay, this is what this applicant is actually trying to tell me in this paragraph. So really thinking about structure in that. And I guess for me as well, the last reflection piece there is just that less is more. For me, I found that less examples were better to work with. In the beginning, I had lots of different things I wanted to get across, and I wasn't really fleshing out my reflections. I was doing quite short reflections. And I guess for me, when I took out more, I had more breathing room to actually flesh them out and really kind of emphasize and put a bit of impact into my reflections, because that, I guess, was the main piece. So that's in terms of just how I understood the reflective practice to be. And I guess this last slide is just thinking about my approach in terms of the application in general. So I guess one of the first things I did, because I tried to think about it in similar to the way you'd like actually apply for a job, is that you're applying to an institution who have their own kind of values and approaches and things like that. So I actually went on to the 4 courses that I was applying for, and I looked at their values and their ethos and the modalities that they use. And I really tried to make the application show that I actually met their criteria. And again, as I said earlier, you're applying for a Band 6 NHS role, so you really want to show that you're ready to step into that. And you want to kind of align yourself with those courses as well. So the main points I kind of had in mind that I wanted to touch on, if possible, thinking about things like a clinical case, maybe working in a certain modality, like using systemic way of working, or maybe with CBT. Again, that's what aligned with, King's was my first your application. I also want to talk about a team, working with diversity and with leadership as well. So again, there's loads of different ways you can structure the application, and those are the points that I pulled out that might be important. But just if you're wondering that's how I approach it anyway. In terms of actually picking out the examples then, there's lots of different examples I wanted to pull from, but my rationale for choosing the ones I picked were trying to pull out kind of relevant theories and modalities that kind of align with my course, and to show that again that I'm ready to step into being a trainee on clinical placement as well. Finally, I tried to kind of use the reflections to show that my style of practitioner that I was, trying to show that I use research and evidence-based practice. Again, some of my preferred courses were they use a more scientist practitioner approach, and I wanted to show that actually quite aligns with me in terms of my style of being a practitioner as well. I also want to put in a bit about leadership, really trying to get across my own passions, and it kind of was a chance for me to kind of reflect on a more macro level rather than just focusing on the actual clinical aspects of the role, because there is a lot more to clinical psychology than just the kind of clinical work and some research. So I was able to put in some reflections on leadership. And lastly, I wanted to communicate my own unique strengths and interests. So, for example, I had experience on neuropsychology and doing cognitive assessments. So I wanted to just put that in there just to show that was something unique to me. Again, anything you can do to try and stand out and show that it kind of makes a lasting impression on those reading your application as well. Just a final point just on reviewing. I tried not to get too many people to review the application. I think it can definitely spoil it in terms of getting too many voices because again, there's so many different ways you can write the application. I found it useful to have maybe one or two just to kind of check that maybe the flow was right or I didn't have too much word count. But in terms of actually getting too many people, sometimes there's loads of different ways you can include things. So I didn't want to overdo it in that way. So yeah, I guess those are my kind of main take-home points on how I approach the application.
Great. Thank you so much, Nathan. And just a reminder for those who just joined, we'll be sharing the slides later on. I just think for me, Nathan, what you said about just making sure that you as a person comes across in your statement is so important because I can imagine shortlisters reading so many different applications. So that's just one thing to hold in mind. Meanwhile, balancing, of course, your reflections on your clinical and research experience as to why you're ready to become a trainee clinical psychologist. Next, I just wanted to hand it to Haleemah.
Thank you. Should I just share the slides?
Yes, please. That would be great.
Oh, it's not letting me share.
No problem, Haleemah. You continue and I'll figure out a way.
Okay, thank you. Should I just start off by speaking a little bit about my experiences before this? Yeah, okay, great. So, hi everyone, it's Haleemah. So for a bit of pre-experience, my education started at University of Birmingham, did my undergrad there. And then as I graduated, I worked as a healthcare assistant whilst I applied for assistant psychologist roles. And in 2022, I became an assistant psychologist for a whole family and perinatal service where I got to is it up? Perfect. Where I got to go into a bit of different types of modalities, learn a little bit about CBTs, a little bit about psychodynamic, etc. So that was at the Tavistock. And then in October 2022, I realized I need to refine some of my research skills. So I was lucky enough to receive a scholarship to UCL to do clinical mental health sciences. And whilst I did that full-time, I part-time worked as an assistant psychologist in a CAMS unit in Barnet Enfield and Haringey. Once I graduated from there, I worked as a research assistant at UCL on a NIHR-funded project working with people with learning disabilities, older people with learning disabilities. And this time last year, I applied to the doctorate, and now I'm a trainee at UEL. So it's a little bit of experience, and what I really kind of pulled out of that was things like research skills, both in my AP role and in my RA role. So things like, in my AP role, for example, I did audit, quality improvement projects, and those are things that I reflected on in my application. And then obviously in my master's, I did a systematic review, and then my RA role, I kind of learned how to juggle all the difficulties around being an RA and all the problems you come across on a randomized control trial. I reflected on that in my application and interview. Clinical skills, I mainly got out of my CAMS placement when I was an assistant psychologist, and that was mainly CBT focused. So I had a paragraph focused on CBT, which is one of the main modalities that you will learn whilst you're on training. And I mean, something I haven't kind of spoken about here, but I guess growing up in the healthcare system and around people who work in the healthcare system, I kind of did naturally adopt some NHS values, and I worked doing some co-production when I was a teenager. So I had some exposure to the NHS system from quite a young age and carried that through my work. I spoke a little bit about that. And my last thing I hopefully have is critical thinking, which, again, through both my education and my experiences of working in the NHS, you kind of build on that. And I spoke a bit about that in my application too. So that's a very quick brief of my pre-training experience. Okay, how did I reflect meaningfully? So again, just want to preface that this is what worked for me. I'm by no means everyone has a different journey into training, and there's no perfect way to reflect, which is what I've learned. So I did start off before I wrote my application, sort of keeping a diary, and pretty much throughout since I got my first AP role, I've kept a diary, writing down the cringiest and greatest reflections as well. So definitely recommend that. I recorded myself. I did self-Socratic questioning, e.g., why did I make this assumption about this when I was reading back on my reflections? And honestly, it was that process that helped me start writing, because it kind of gave me some awareness on actually, what I did in 2022 was really, really great. And that's a really good experience. So, and it helped me think about what things I'm willing to learn next and happy to embrace whilst I apply for a trainee role. So for me, it was very narrative, because I guess I've kind of followed my diaries throughout my pre-experience training. So the way that I kind of approached it was I kind of focused on what experiences brought up the most challenges for me, and chose those to reflect on in my application, and then linked them back to things like the 9 competencies of a clinical psychologist, and how either that will, that makes me excited to learn those competencies, or how I've demonstrated some of those competencies. And I was quite explicit when writing that in my application. So I gave, similar to what Nathan was saying, a very small amount of context, and then a larger amount of reflection on this makes me ready for training. And I literally use those words, this makes me ready for training, because I show cultural humility. I don't know what I said, but yeah, something along those lines. So the next thing I would say is about remaining authentic and honest to yourself. Just go back really quickly. I did want to say that I kind of sprinkled in NHS values throughout my paragraphs. And then, I had a paragraph, like I said, it was narrative, so a little bit about my experience and background, then a clinical one, then a research one, and then similar to Nathan, what I bring that's unique to training. But yeah, it's just back to the authentic and honest point. I was very aware that I don't fit into the typical trainee box. So I'm not white, for example, I'm Muslim. And so it was really important for me to bring that truth, but in a meaningful way. So why that actually is important for me in the context of training. And just in making sure that every sentence that I was writing had a purpose behind it, and said something. And finally, I used social graces to reflect and bring in a bit of intersectionality throughout the questions, so not just the reflective one, but I was thinking about using those models when working with people with different identities, and how that affects my practice, how I've adapted my practice, but also in the question where you kind of talk about yourself a little bit and what you hope to gain from training. I kind of brought that in there just to give a bit about me and a bit of context on who I am. Perfect. So it wasn't the most streamlined process. I was doing my MSc whilst I was writing my application, so it's very messy. So for me, it was really important to start early. And I really thought about, so it says I've got 9 drafts, and it was wonderful that so many people helped me along the way. But what Nathan was saying, it becomes overwhelming, and I lost a bit of authenticity to that. So I actually went back to draft 5 and submitted that one. And just again, honing on that, I made a timeline of my experiences that really helped me kind of make sense of all those different experiences that you have. I blurted everything onto a page, which was super messy. If you look at my diary, you cannot read it. But this slowly helped me refine things. And also just accepting that I probably wasn't 100% on how I felt at the end of when I finished writing, and that it was good enough, and that was fine for me, and that was how I looked after myself as well, was that believing that I did good enough. And finally is connecting with people who are going through the same thing. So I think sometimes it can get a bit competitive, so it's nice to bring in a community and find people who are also applying, and that can really give you a sense of community and support too, which was really instrumental in writing my application. And And that's that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haleemah. Really, really great tips. I actually also journaled myself and just wrote down my thoughts when I did my clinical work. And I really found the applying CBT on yourself, the asking yourself the downward arrowing questions really, really helpful in identifying the reasons why you want to be a clinical psychologist. So that's a really great tip. Thank you so much, Haleemah. I'm just going to now hand it over to Lizzie.
Thank you. I'm just getting my slides up. Okay. Can you see that okay? Whoa. Yeah.
Yes.
So this is a bit of a timeline of my journey to training. And just to say again, as everyone said so far, this is just my personal experience. And I'm aware that the three of us who have spoken have all had AP posts actually in part of that journey, but that's not to say that that's the only route at all. And actually thinking about the people who are in mine and Jason's cohort at the moment, we have people who were PWPs before, high intensity CBT trainees, also people who came from totally different careers and had a slightly later in life career path change. So yeah, this is not the only route that you can take by any means. But yeah, so I guess starting at undergrad, I did a BSc in education and psychology at the University of Southampton. I wasn't planning to do education. I wasn't planning to do a joint honours, but I didn't get the A levels I wanted, and I ended up getting in through clearing. And the most important thing to me was that I got onto a BPS accredited course so that I could move towards clinical psychology. So it all worked out, and I actually really enjoyed the education component of that course, as it turned out. I then did a master's in early intervention in psychosis at King's, and part of the reason why I chose that was because I knew that I had King's in mind as the place that I wanted to do my DClin, but also they had a placement included in that master's, which was in South London and Maudsley NHS Trust, which is where the placements are mostly for people who are on the DClin at King's. So then I did that placement in 2019, and that was in a home treatment team or a crisis team. And I think because of that experience, when I was then applying for AP posts, I applied for so many AP posts, by the way, and it actually took quite a long time before I got any interviews. And that was a whole other long-winded process in itself. But finally, I did get an AP post in Luton crisis team. And yeah, I think that's because of that experience I had on my placement in my master's. But I understand that is a privileged position to be in, to be able to do a placement that's unpaid. Then my first time applying was after I just hit that minimum criteria of a year of clinical experience. So I applied, first application, and I got nothing at all, no interviews, nothing. And after that time, I had a 1-year contract at Luton. When that ended, I then got another AP post at a team called Pickup, which is an outpatient psychosis team at South London and Maudsley. And I was there for a year and a half. And I also helped out with some assessments for a research trial that was linked up with the Pickup team. And then after that, I got onto training. So I think something that's maybe slightly different about my journey to the other two people that have spoken so far is that I haven't had official research roles at all. And also, actually, I guess there might be a bit of a misconception sometimes that you need a PhD or publications to get into specific courses. And I didn't have either of those. Yeah, hopefully that's reassuring for some people. My next slide is, how did I personally reflect meaningfully on the statement? And I think the first time I applied, I was really just trying to get skills and experience in a very kind of CV way down on the page. And I really focused all of my efforts on that main statement and didn't really put much thought into the other questions in the other boxes about even just the CV bit about like previous jobs or reflecting on what I enjoy doing outside of psychology and things like that. So then when it came to the second year applying, I think I was I just gave more information. I'm going to go in, so I'm mixing up the order here a bit, but yeah, I did give more information about me as a person. And like Jason was saying, this is one of those things I think that helps your application to stand out. And the shift went from being, I stopped giving the answers that I thought people would want to read on an application, and actually just took some time to think, what do I actually enjoy? Even if I don't think it's what people necessarily want to hear, what actually makes me who I am. And it might be things that I don't know, might sound nerdy or niche or whatever, but ultimately that's who I am. And that's how I cope with the demands of my role, is having hobbies and my own personal interests. And I think that's part of what people want to see when they're reading an application as well, my understanding, that you will be able to cope with what is, a demanding course. And yeah, the other aspect was, I think, through experiences of being in teams where you reflect on clinical work, I'd also, through supervision as well on those in those AP posts, started to think about my personal experiences as well. And I think I felt more confident the second time around in sort of linking those up, and then also linking those in with current world issues and NHS issues as well. It was sort of COVID time when I was applying, so that was really pertinent. And how I approached the statement, I've got a couple of slides on this. The first one is just the structure that I used. I had a look back at what I did, and it was such an iterative process. It took a really long time to get to this point, but this is what I ended up going with. It's absolutely not a template, and it will not work for everyone, but I just think maybe I would have found it quite helpful to see this as maybe how someone might have structured an answer when you haven't necessarily seen one before. But this is the way that I did it. And again, I kept the example brief, and as has already been said, really thinking about the reflections on that. I made sure to mention leadership, culture, equality, diversity, and inclusion. I had an overarching summary at the beginning linking to sort of summarizing all of my experiences. So that included the CBT that I'd done, as well as the other modalities that I've used as well. Yeah, and that's there if you want to have a look in more detail. But yeah, again, as Nathan said, actually, I framed my statement around the courses that I was applying for, and I knew that I wanted King's. That was my top choice. So I really did hone in on CBT and systemic, because I knew that those were the two modalities at King's, and really the ethos of the course, thinking about diversity and equality. I used the Trainee Clinical Psychologist job description and person specification to think what skills am I needing to pull out here, and that again links with your working at band 6 level on training. I emphasised culture, equality, diversity, and inclusion reflections from my work in any reflective spaces that I'd been in as an AP, things like that. I sort of brought those in. And again, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 people in the end, but I had feedback from a few people, and I was really aware that I only wanted a couple of people to look it over, because that conflicting advice can be really, really confusing. And I think if you possibly can, choose people who know you quite well. And I found it really helpful to have people who had either trained at the place that I was wanting to get into in particular, or at someone. I had a friend on a different course who had recently applied, so had recent experience of the application. And again, that's going to be totally dependent on who you know, who you happen to be supervised by, etc., etc. But that's something that I found really helpful. And my friend actually shared their application with me, which I found very helpful, again, just to see how to structure, how to fit things in that small word count. But I didn't ask, and I would say, please don't ask people for their applications, because they actually can be really personal, and a lot of people might share personal reflections. But if people offer, then yeah, that's great. Something that's helpful too. Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lizzie, for sharing your reflections. I'm aware of time, so I just want to quickly hand it over to, first of all, the 2 clinical psychologists. So first of all, it would be Dr. Yvette Arthur to share their experience as shortlisters in terms of what they might be looking out for, and also any tips that they can share.
Thank you. Let me just put my slide in presenter mode. Hopefully that's all showing okay. I can only see Jason. Okay, good. Jason's nodding good. So let me go back to the beginning. So just to say a big disclaimer, that's why I've got it with a exclamation mark. These are thoughts of a couple of shortlisters who do not short for every single DClin Psych course. So please bear that in mind. Each course approaches it slightly different, so it's important to hold that in mind. I collaborated with Dr. Melody Smith. We went to the same primary school together, and we're both clinical psychologists. So she wasn't able to be here, but she's put it into this, so it's really helpful. So to begin with, as with an NHS application, shortlisters always receive guidance from the course on what criteria to be used in reviewing each application. And I love that everyone that spoke today has talked about reviewing the job description and the person specification, which is my third bullet point on there. By the way, my slides are really wordy. In case I skip bits, you can see what I was about to talk about because I'm aware of time. Where is this job description and person specification? It's on Clearinghouse. Clearinghouse website is your friend. There's so many resources on there, so don't overlook it. Don't start writing things just based on watching a YouTube video about what a clinical psychologist is. Literally go through Clearinghouse. You'll see a guidance on the application form and also on the job description and person specification, because then you can write your application attuned to that. And usually the shortlisting guidance that we receive is somewhat attuned to the person specification in that guidance. And all of you would have written an application that was successful and attuned to that. So it's really helpful to look at the experience of past and current trainees. Don't know any trainees? LinkedIn. There's lots of people who are willing to share. You might receive a no because people are really stressed out, having gotten onto the course and realizing that there's lots of work to do. There might be someone else who's willing to help, but it's really helpful to reach out. Also try the BPS alternative handbook, because then you get a sense of what the trainee's experience is from a wide number of trainees, and see what the course kind of, how they uphold their ethos. And that's my point too as well. You can get a sense of the course from either their description on the Clearinghouse website or their actual website. And I think Clearinghouse might have a link to their website, because again, I think as Nathan said, you can get a sense of the values of that course that you're applying to, what kind of models that they predominantly use. All courses have to train us in CBT, and then there'll be other modalities. I trained at UEL, so we learned about social constructionism, narrative therapy, so slightly different from the other courses, but really helpful to look into that. So website and then Clearinghouse. I've already spoken about the JD and the person specification. So JD is person specification. And I think this is really helpful for when it goes to that question about what you hope to get from training. You're realistic about what training is. It's tough. You know, there's assignments, there's exams, there's moving on to placements at minimum every 6 months. Reading that will give you a realistic understanding of what will be expected of you, instead of jumping to maybe 20 years time and writing policy and changing the world. Yes, you can do that, but for the 3 years, we want to know that you understand what you're going to be doing on training. A big one, if you've not applied before, I don't know how you feel about this, but consider writing a new application. Start from fresh. I know it's horrible and you just want to do edit and start pulling things out, but maybe just get rid of that application, start from fresh, and then see how you feel. Obviously that can still be saved somewhere, but that can be really helpful. The last point that I have on there, because it's something that when I'm supporting APs and then I see the their application, sometimes when people are talking about the experiences, it's so rich, and then it's like thinned out. You don't get the depth and the personal relevance that you do on the application because it's in written form. So try to talk it through with someone. You can record it like the way we're recording this on Teams, record it on your phone, listen back to it, and then you can think about the depth and the personal relevance that you spoke about more freely in that conversation when you weren't consumed with word count and does this sound right. You were just speaking freely. So that is a really good point to put there and have in mind. Got 3 slides. So my second one, understanding the difference between the occupation section and the personal statement. So what we sometimes see is that people treat the personal statement bit as the occupation. So they're just detailing, I did this, 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 and this. And you can see my indented point there. We want the occupation section to reflect your main duties and the personal statement to think about how the experience equips you to be a trainee clinical psychologist. It's your chance to show off, right? So understand the differences. Don't repeat yourself and say the same thing in the personal statement. Think about your sections as well. Again, Clearinghouse has got really good, helpful guidance on this, but the statement about what you hope to get from training, you don't have to talk about that too much in the personal statement bit, which is the first question. So think about your sections and what you're putting where. It's really nice to start with a strong opening sentence or paragraph about who you are. Again, a really good point about standing out. It helps to anchor us to what you're going to talk about in the remaining areas. I think Haleemah touched on this already, and it's a bugbearer of mine as a person who is a minority in various forms as a clinical psychologist. But if you're speaking about your social identity, you're Black, you're gay, you have a disability, why is it important to share this? And I'm pedantic in saying this because I want us to be able to reflect on, actually, how have I made sense of this? I don't want to be tokenistic, you know, in a picture that looks good because I'm the minority. We want to see as shortlisters that you've had a thought about how this will impact your practice in the future, your experience on training, services, policy, etc., etc. But again, that reflection should come in there. So it's not just an empty statement, but you want to see that you've thought about it. And of course, start writing, get it on. You can always go over it and cut it down, etc. But don't be too consumed with the character count because it can really throw us off. Consider using paragraphs that can really help the flow for the shortlister so we know where you're heading to. And then you can also check with those paragraphs, have I repeated myself in multiple places because I was just kind of putting everything down and didn't really have a structure. So a tip for you there. And then my last slide, be explicit about your experiences. So I've got a couple of groups there. Again, there might be things that the courses ask for working with particular groups or more than one group, etc. Be explicit about that. So you can see all of those examples there. Be explicit if you've had any leadership experiences like mentoring, service development. We want to hear about that. That will be somewhere in the person specification about leadership roles. I think we've already spoken about stating your points explicitly, succinctly, and logically, definitely Nathan's bit. It can be really helpful for someone to review your application. I certainly agree with not having like 15 people review it. It's going to be so confusing. First person said take it out, the other person said why haven't you added it? So consider who you want to review your application. But I will also ask a non-psychologist to review it to make sure it just makes sense, that you haven't lost too much of your identity in there. But having a non-psychologist review it can be really helpful. For the publication section, because this comes up a lot, and people like to use Impress. I think I used Impress in my application as well. But technically, Impress means that you submitted it to a journal or you submitted it somewhere. But think about conference presentations, booklets, internal publications, small projects, contributions to a larger policy. I saw a couple of assistant psychologists contribute to the BPS guidance on employing assistant psychologists, which is fantastic. And add a short description. Don't just leave it as a title, but tell people how you were involved in it and what the impact was. I think we spoke about this for the hobbies and interests section. We want to hear that you are a real person. We want to hear things that you enjoy. Yes, maybe all of us will read a psychology book or two on the weekend, but in reality, we're out there having fun, hopefully. And those are things that are going to anchor you during training, not reading the psychology book when you're super stressed, but maybe spending time with your friends. So that is an opportunity to give like a personal sense of who you are and what will help you during the possible ups and downs of training. Some courses consider contextual application. So again, this is detailed on the Clearinghouse website, but this means, say, people who are care leavers, people who had caring responsibilities during their undergraduate degree or master's, that might be helpful in understanding why maybe you got a low 2-1 or a 2-2, etc. So consider adding in contextual applications. If you're not sure what that is, Google it and it will come up. And again, coherency, you've written this beautiful application, and because there's lots of typos, too many filler words, the spelling is not quite there, it doesn't make sense to the person reading it, and it's such a shame. So make sure you double check it for all of those bits that I've got on the last slide there. And hopefully that's helpful to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Yvette. There were
Indeed.
so many helpful tips there. Thank you so much, Yvette. I'm aware of time as well, so I just wanted to introduce and have our next speaker, final speaker, Dr. Fran Meaton, who's the head of selection of the IOPPN course. Um, Fran, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you see me okay?
Yes, yes, I can.
Perfect. I came in a little bit after the start. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. And hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you all. I haven't had time to prepare any slides because I came to this quite late in terms of stepping in as a speaker, but I have kind of detailed some thoughts that I wanted to share with you. And I'm also going to start with a disclaimer. I think you've probably heard this before. I know Yvette mentioned it, but I am here kind of representing, I suppose, my own views rather than the views of the institution I work at. And I think what I would say as well, just like others have said, is that actually there's many ways to get onto training. So of course, these are my views from the experience I've had in the last few years, but actually someone else from a different position with a different lens might also give some other views as well. So hopefully this is helpful, but please don't kind of, I suppose, get too caught up on like there being one way or one set of opinions. Hopefully the range of speakers you've heard tonight as well also give that sense that we've all got different things that we either put in our applications or that we're looking for. That said, I would say that I really kind of was listening to what other people were saying and absolutely agree with so many of the things that have been said as well. So some of them might be a little bit of a repeat, but hopefully kind of from my perspective as well. As I've mentioned, I think one of the things that I really think about when I'm shortlisting is that actually there's no one route into clinical training. And actually, I think it might have been apologists. I can't remember actually if it was Elizabeth or Haleemah, but one of our earlier speakers said, like, I enjoyed my route into training. I enjoyed the things that I did. And I think that really shows when people are writing their application, when they've done a number of different roles and they can show that actually they gained from each role rather than kind of doing it as a means to an end to get onto the training. So hopefully, as you go through your route onto training, you actually really enjoy the different jobs or different roles that you're doing, and you're able to kind of show that in quite a kind of perhaps kind of reflective way when you come to talk about why your experience has equipped you to come onto a clinical psychology training course. So one thing that a few other speakers have already mentioned, and I'm sure many of you are aware of this anyway, is that when we're thinking about shortlisting for the clinical psychology training, we are thinking about a band 6 role. So if you think about the idea that, for example, band 6 is a role for people who already have a number of years of experience and a number of qualifications very often as well. And so what we're looking for is for you to show us why you are ready to be trained at a band 6 role. Of course, in clinical psychology training, you will be trained for a further 3 years. So no one's expecting you to tick all the boxes of all the competences when you're applying. But we are thinking about kind of, does this person have the experience, just as Yvette was saying as well, to be kind of ready for training, if you like, to be ready to go on and take up that very kind of multifaceted role for the next 3 years, where you'll be trained doing lots of different things and be put in lots of different situations as well. And I suppose when we're thinking about shortlisting for the clinical training, we're also thinking about kind of, are you able to show to us that you understand what clinical psychology training is about? And then, of course, show us that you are ready to undertake that training as well. So I suppose one thing that I always think about, and I think this has been mentioned by others already, is that rather than looking for you to list your experiences, yes, it's great for us to hear about all the things you've done, of course, but we're really looking for you to reflect on those experiences as well. So being able to reflect on your learning as you've gone through different roles. Some of that might be kind of, I learned all of these wonderful things, or I've been in many roles and been able to show that I've developed many different competencies. But I suppose also that sense of kind of what it is to be human, but what it is also to be a clinical psychologist and a clinical psychology trainee. Some reflection maybe on when things went well, but also maybe kind of reflections on when things didn't go well. I always find it quite refreshing to see that kind of sense, I suppose, of kind of honesty reflected in terms of actually we know things are going to be tricky at times, and certainly through the clinical training, as Yvette mentioned, you're put under a number of different, oftentimes new experiences. You're changing roles often as well. There are lots of different assessments, and we know it's going to be a really enriching time, but also undeniably a busy time and sometimes a stressful time as well. So I guess there's also that sense of kind of sharing, I suppose, where you have developed resilience and where there have been times that things haven't gone well, but you've learned from it and things like that. So I think don't be afraid to kind of show your experiences, kind of even when there's been bumps in the road, because actually as a shortlister, I find that quite refreshing to see, and it shows to me that you've really been kind of considering your learning as well. I'm aware of time, so I will keep moving on through my list. So again, one thing I would say is because the clinical training covers many different competences, so we are obviously thinking about being able to deliver in a clinically facing role in terms of kind of delivering therapy. We're also, of course, as you know, thinking about research competences, leadership competences, lots of other competences that we train for in the clinical psychology training role. So again, I would say do make sure you showcase those. By the time people come to training, people are really, really experienced. And so it's about kind of showing that you have experience in these different areas rather than maybe just showcasing one of those areas. How are you kind of, I suppose, rounded in your experiences and ready for clinical training? And again, one thing I would say, I suppose, when you are reflecting on your experiences is try to show some depth. And again, I think Yvette, you'd already said this, kind of try to show some depth kind of beneath perhaps some of the kind of buzzwords or the terminology. If you're talking about why culture, equality, diversity is important, then kind of don't just say it's important or I have kind of done something that shows I'm aware of this. Show kind of how or why, or really kind of add something to show that there's something kind of beyond maybe just kind of using buzzwords. And again, kind of thinking about that, one thing that I'm often holding in mind when I'm reading people's statements is thinking about NHS values and NHS competences as well. So most people, when they are kind of ready for training, when they're applying for training, you know, as I mentioned, you've done already a range of roles normally, and actually you have this wealth of experience and you can reflect on that in the context of the NHS very often as well. And it's really helpful to be able to see that you're aware of NHS values, and again that you can show, rather than just mentioning it, that you can show kind of why this is important and how your work to date might have actually contributed to working in a way that represents NHS values. And then I think I'll draw to a close. I would just say one thing that I'm not sure has been mentioned is also kind of thinking about your referees. So we've had loads of really useful information about kind of what to put where on the forms and things like that. As a shortlister, I also really look at the referee statements, unsurprisingly, but I really think about actually, are the referees able to say something that the person who's applying maybe hasn't had time to kind of say in the short amount of space that you get, or hasn't had room to say in the short amount of space that you get to write on your application form? Or maybe the applicant's written something, but they haven't had the opportunity or the word count to kind of pad that out. And sometimes actually, I think actually, has the referee said anything more about this? Am I going to get any more information? And oftentimes when we see applications that are probably going to be rated higher than others, it's where the referees can also kind of bring something new. So as well as kind of saying that, as well as kind of seeing there's a match between what the applicant and the referees are saying, sometimes the referees can also add things as well. And oftentimes that happens when the applicant's really spoken to the referee at the point of applying and been able to kind of talk about why they want to apply, and been able to give the referee perhaps kind of additional information that will help the referee write a really meaningful statement. So I would also really think about who your referees are, and do make sure you give good time to approach them and talk to them about your application if you're able to do that. I recognise that not everyone is able to do that if they're asking somebody from quite some time ago to write a reference. Right, I'll stop talking there, given time. But yeah, I hope some of that's been helpful, and thank you for the invite.
Thank you so much, Fran. That's so helpful and lots of useful tips. I'm aware of time, so we'll quickly move on to Q&A. Just to preface this, we've done the application workshop for 3 years in a row now, and all of them are all available freely on YouTube. So some of the questions that you may have asked on the Q&A may have already been answered in other Q&A. So please make sure you check them first. And I guess meanwhile, Yvette and Fran are here, I just wanted to direct this question. Do I need to include the link and full list of co-authors for publications? I'm concerned about the word count.
So I can jump in there. One thing we do is if we see somebody has got a publication, we do actually go to look at the publication. So you will need to give enough information so that we can find it. I don't think you'd need to give all of the authors necessarily. I think you could put, for example, the first author name, where your name comes, and et al. But yeah, just enough information so that we can actually go and look at that publication would be important from my perspective.
Great, thank you, Fran. The next one is going to be directed to the trainees. Would you suggest using reflection models, for example, Gibbs models, for the reflective statement? I can have a go at this. I personally didn't, just because I thought that it was quite drawn out. I think it's a really good starting point if you, for like everyone else has said, when you first write the draft and not worrying about the word count, having a model in mind, that might be helpful to pull those experiences out. But on my actual statement, I didn't, just because of the word count. I'm not sure if anyone else had anything to add. Oh, Haleemah.
Yeah, mine was a bit similar because I feel like the Gibbs model is quite in depth and you have such a limited number of characters. But what I did do was when I was mapping out my experiences, I was using that model to kind of think in depth of why that would make me a good trainee, whatever my experience is. So if in that, reflection cycle, I used supervision, and like that helped me think reflexively, for example, I don't know, whatever. It was those little parts I was drawing out and trying to make a little bit more succinct, but similar to you, not in the actual application. Yeah.
Thank you. So next question that I saw that feels really, really important for career changers. So I am a career changer. Should I include unrelated work experience where it is relevant to the competencies, for example, leadership?
I would say yes. It would be good to hear how you've demonstrated that leadership skill. But are you thinking occupation section or the longer word answer? I think I would ask you to have a think about where you want to put that and whether you've actually done more leadership roles in psychology roles that you've not actually kind of written in depth and maybe prioritizing those. But it's great to hear about leadership roles in other contexts. That would be my response to that.
Thank you, Yvette. I saw that Fran briefly unmuted. I just wondered if you had anything additional to add.
So actually, I'd agree with everything Yvette said. Yeah, I think if you are changing career, absolutely, it's great to hear about how what you've done before is relevant alongside all the other kind of clinical psychology focused stuff that I'm sure you've done as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Just scrolling through the questions. So for those who applied several times, any reflections on why the first time wasn't successful?
I guess I can answer that. I applied twice, and I think similar to what Lizzie said. The first application was just very much listing my experience. I don't think my reflections were quite deep enough as well. And I think what I said on the slides, I actually removed examples and just actually fleshed them out a bit more, just allowed me to get a bit more breathing space. I think by that time I was a bit more comfortable in my experience as well. I tried to get across what I was passionate about. And I think it kind of stood out a lot better. And I think I also really focused on the format and like kind of writing style as well. I think it was a lot clearer. I remember just reading both applications and it was just a lot easier to read and a bit more impactful because of those points. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. There's a question. Is it better to talk about one therapeutic modality, or can we discuss how we used an integrative approach for a service user and why this benefited them? And additionally, what we did to be able to do this effectively, including doing training in certain therapeutic skills.
I can jump in with an initial thought, and I would say, yes, it's great to hear about a number of different therapeutic modalities. We are, as clinical psychologists, trained as integrative therapists, so we'll be trained to draw on different evidence-based therapeutic approaches. And if you can already show that you have experience of that, I think that would be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree as well. But I think also make sure you state what the integrative therapies were. So don't leave us guessing what they were. But yeah, echo that. It's really helpful to think about integrative ways of working.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I also mentioned kind of integrative working, especially when, let's say, because I was a PWP, when CBT wasn't really effective, because it links back to when you think about as a clinical psychologist, you need to update your formulation all the time, and that gives you a rationale for, well, okay, that makes sense why I'm using a different modality for this particular person, and also links in with the NHS person-centered values. So it's important to think about that. Okay,
And
I'm
you're
just to
also
scroll through.
reflecting there.
Oh.
Sorry. You're also reflecting there in that response, Jason. So really helpful to see kind of live reflections around why I wouldn't do that, why I had to change. And yeah, good example.
Thank you. This one I'm not sure, but I think that a lot of people were wondering, are there any advantages to submitting early? And does this at all stand out? I think from my understanding, there is an advantage of a lower application price, but I'm not sure that there will be that means your application will stand out. No. Okay.
So not from my perspective, we get them in a big batch. So yeah, makes no difference.
So there's one that's really highly upvoted, and I think this really depends on trainees' willingness to share their, I guess, their own experience. So it says, I think I have relevant experience. However, I struggle with pulling out those reflections. Could you give an example of pulling a reflection from, I'm guessing, your experience from clinical or research? So again, I just wanted to preface that if trainees feel able to or want to, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in. I can't remember my application 100%, but I think I remember trying to use an example that pulls in different things. So I think I used a cognitive assessment. But again, as Yvette said, like why you're actually doing it and showing that you're able to understand why we do certain things. So I use a cognitive assessment because of their certain difficulties and then what that actually means. So actually making meaningful adaptations and then what that meant for the client as well. So trying to just pull out like why we're doing certain things and what the impact it made, but then also showing that you're able to evidence those skills as well. So it's not just saying, oh, I'm able to do CBT or I'm able to do a cognitive assessment, why we do certain things and, how it actually makes an impact to clients. Yeah, and be able to kind of show a bit of critical thinking as well, all in the one. I think it's a really impactful example to use. So yeah, I think mine was, I think a cognitive assessment, and we had to use some visual aids in the session to make adaptations. So again, it just shows like why we're doing the work. So that might be an example of a reflection.
And I think,
I can, oh, sorry.
sorry, Jason. I was gonna, yeah, tag on to what Nathan said. I think also, as I said, just talking through these experiences with other people can be really helpful because we think faster than we can type. And then you've got that blank Word document open that's so intimidating that you're thinking, oh, this doesn't sound quite right. You're editing it as you're putting the ideas down. So sometimes it's really helpful to talk through the experiences that you're having currently. If hopefully you've saved the job description and the person specification for your current role, it can be helpful to go over those as well and pull things out, but talk to someone about it. If there's no one available, voice note yourself and start pulling those out. And then you can listen to it back and start thinking, okay, how can I write about this? But again, it can be really tricky going straight to typing it out. That can be really a block for some people.
Haleemah?
Just to like bounce off of that point, something that I found really helpful was writing my reflections. As I mentioned earlier, I like kept a diary throughout my like pre-training experience. And it would be literally just the event. And then maybe like 2 weeks later, whilst I was on a run or something, I'll go back and be like, oh, actually, that felt like this in that moment. And then I'll go back and like fill that in. So it doesn't have to be like you have to reflect then and there in this space. You can like kind of, yeah, come back to it, think about it, and then like flesh out that reflection a little bit more. And I think that also applies for, it was helpful for me to do that when I was preparing for interviews as well, where I was really trying to get into those sort of deeper reflections. And like, yeah, just, sometimes it's nice to just forget about something and then come back to it and think, okay, with a fresh mind. And yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. Next question I saw, I don't want to lose it. I think someone asked, how do you reflect, or how directly did you reflect on your social identity, for example, race, class, disabilities? And I guess I think I can have a go at this, and everyone else can jump in if they want to as well. So I guess I think it really comes back to what Yvette said, thinking about why is it important, especially in shaping your, I guess you want to be a clinical psychologist, and also why that might make you a better trainee, because fundamentally, I guess the question is asking what makes you a better trainee. And I guess I can give an own personal example, without giving too much. So I reflected on my own sexuality, for example, because of experiences in therapy, and that made me realize actually, you know, perhaps therapy is not best adapted for certain client groups, for example, the LGBTQ plus population. So that made me think about, oh, actually, what would I want to do differently if I was a clinical psychologist and I want to do research in this area? So in that way, I linked it back to my identity and my own lived experience. But yeah, I wondered if anybody else had anything they wanted to share. Yvette.
Thank you for sharing that, Jason. I'm sharing mine, but holding in mind it was like over a decade ago. It's been a while since I applied. But I remember when I first finished uni, I went to a UCL event that was encouraging people from ethnic minorities to apply for the DClin. So this was all the way back in 2010. And so that was my opening statement. I'm Black. That's it. And I thought that would get me on because it was like I was told we're looking for more diversity. I am diverse, give me a place. And that's where I asked the question, so what? And it sounds so harsh, but it really got me to think. So then I thought, as a Black person, a person of Black African Ghanaian heritage specifically, I'm aware that there's different understandings of mental health being more spiritual, being more cultural, that can lead people to different paths towards help seeking. I work in a psychosis service, which predominantly affects people of Black origin. So thinking about how I have that understanding, how can I hold that? I've done research in that area and bring that to life, say, in an MDT discussion, where we're thinking about culture and how that is meeting, say, mental health. So that was my so what. I can hold that understanding, but also in a research way, in a scientist practitioner way of my culture, investigate it and hold it in mind when I'm in a meeting or live working with a client who might be a minority in an area, and think about the experiences of racism or acculturation and so forth. So that was my so what moment. And hopefully you'll hold that in mind and not do what I did. It was like, I'm this, give me a place. Mr. John.
Thank you so much, Yvette, for sharing that. I'm aware of time and I don't want to keep everyone for longer because you all deserve an evening. But I just wanted to say a big thank you to all presenters today for taking the time out and sharing their experiences. And again, thank you everybody for registering and attending the webinar today. I will be sharing the recording as soon as possible. And we're so sorry that we can't answer all questions. But like I said before the Q&A, we've made 3 years worth of application YouTube videos available on our YouTube channel, and I will send that as part of an email as well that you can review, and some of your questions might be answered in those. But otherwise, if you're interested and if you want to subscribe to our mailing list, if you haven't already, our email is iac@kcl.ac.uk. Okay, well, thank you everyone again, and have a good evening. Okay, bye bye all.